There is something that no one told you when you were born. Something that doesn't come in books, that they don't teach you in school, that your parents didn't fully understand either.
Being born is a sentence. Not poetic, not symbolic, literal. Being born is a sentence with an uncertain date, with pain guaranteed, with suffering guaranteed. And the cruelest part is that no one asked you if you wanted to participate. There was no choice. There was no consent. You were thrown into the world without instructions, without a safety net, without an escape. And since then, all you've done is survive. But wait, don't turn off the video yet, because this isn't a complaint. I'm not here to cry or convince you of anything. I'm here to show you a crack in reality, a fissure that has always been there, but that you've ignored out of habit, fear, or comfort. Today we're going to talk about that which hides behind every forced smile, every empty achievement, every "I'm fine" you say, without thinking. We're going to talk about the suffering that comes included in the package of existence. And even more, we're going to question whether this suffering, this life, this imposed existence is worth anything at all. What if I told you that your whole life, every step, every struggle, every moment of joy you celebrate is just the superficial varnish of a greater abyss? What if behind every human experience there is a truth we've preferred to ignore because it's too uncomfortable to face? What would happen if suffering wasn't a flaw of the system, but the system itself? This is where an idea enters that has been silenced, rejected, even hated, because it's a direct threat to the most powerful narrative of our species, that living is something good, that life is a gift, that being here, breathing, suffering, aging, losing is a privilege. But what if it isn't? What if being born isn't a privilege but a tragedy in disguise? What if the biggest mistake of all was bringing someone into the world without asking them if they wanted to come? David Benatar put it with brutal clarity. According to him, bringing someone into the world is a morally questionable act because it involves imposing an inevitable fate of pain. Even though that person may experience moments of happiness, even though they may laugh, even though they may love, they will never escape the essence. Existence hurts. Always. It hurts at the beginning, it hurts in the middle, and it hurts at the end. Even happy moments are sustained by the fear of losing them. Even moments of peace carry a shadow of anxiety. And the most disturbing part? No one escapes that. But don't get me wrong. This video isn't to convince you that life is crap. You already know it, even if you don't say it out loud. This video is to go further, to dismantle that false belief that, despite everything, it's worth it. Because what they've sold you as hope is nothing more than a mental trick to keep you moving forward. And if you're brave, if you have the courage to keep listening, you might find something more valuable than hope. You might find the truth, or at least a glimpse of it. Are you brave enough to look directly at what you've always avoided? Because what's coming next is not easy. We're going to enter a territory where there is no light, where thoughts are sharp, where logic cuts deeper than any emotion. We're going to break down the most dangerous idea of all. That maybe, just maybe, the most compassionate thing we could have done was not being born. Think about this. Have you ever stopped to observe someone's face on public transport? Not with the superficial glance with which we pass by hundreds of people every day, but with true attention. Look at the eyes, not the gestures they've learned to use to hide. Look deeper. You'll see a sadness that isn't spoken, a tiredness that doesn't come from work or lack of sleep, but from something much deeper. It's the exhaustion of existing, of carrying a weight that no one asked for, of holding a life each day that teeters between routine, fear, loss, and the expectation that everything will get better. But it doesn't get better. It gets better for a while, yes, and then it hurts again. That's the mechanic, reward and punishment. As if life were a Pavlovian conditioning trap. It gives you a break, a smile, a kiss, an achievement, and when you let your guard down, it hits you. Diseases, betrayals, frustrations, emptiness. And it starts again. Now I ask you, if you were offered a life without pain, without distress, without anxiety, would you take it? Most people would say yes. But there's a problem. No such life exists. Pain isn't an anomaly, it's the core, it's the root. Every moment of joy only exists in contrast, and that contrast is what makes suffering inevitable. Life is a pendulum, and it always returns. That's why the real problem isn't that we suffer. The real problem is that we were thrown into an existence where suffering is unavoidable, and we were taught to be grateful for it. That's the most perverse part. Society has wrapped suffering in gift wrap. They tell you that pain makes you stronger, that tears teach you, that scars are medals. But no one stops to ask, what if learning doesn't compensate for the pain? What if what you learn isn't worth what you've lost along the way? And here we arrive at another critical point, the glorification of trauma. We live in a culture that romanticizes suffering. What doesn't kill you makes you stronger, they repeat. A lie. Sometimes what doesn't kill you just leaves you broken, leaves you sleepless, leaves you trembling at the slightest sign of danger. And on top of that, they expect you to smile, to be resilient, to get up as if nothing happened. Do you know what that generates? People disconnected from themselves. People who no longer know if what they feel is authentic or just a learned response. Because from childhood, they teach us that being sad is wrong, that crying is weakness, that doubting is a defect. And so you grow up pretending. You become a puppet that repeats motivational phrases while falling apart inside. All to not seem weak, all to fit into an existence you never asked for. And meanwhile, we continue perpetuating the cycle. People keep having children, hoping this time will be different. But it won't be. Because the problem isn't individual, it's structural. It's inherent to the human experience. You can't save someone from the pain of living, because simply being alive is the source of the pain. And why do we keep doing it? Because we're programmed to repeat the pattern. Because we need to feel that our life has meaning, and bringing another life into the world is the fastest way to fool ourselves. My child is my reason to live, they say. Do you realize the trap? You're born without asking, and then you become someone else's reason for life, as if your suffering could justify another's. That's the reproductive selfishness Benatar spoke of. It's not about hatred towards children or contempt for family. It's about accepting a brutal truth, that bringing a life into the world means assuming that life will suffer, and doing so for personal reasons, to fill a void, to meet expectations, to continue a legacy, is, at its core, a deeply selfish decision. And do you know what's the most twisted part? That if someone decides not to reproduce, they're seen as strange, as incomplete, as someone who hasn't understood the purpose of life. But what purpose? To survive and repeat the cycle of suffering? To create another consciousness just so it repeats the same story of pain, fear, loss, and forced adaptation? The true act of compassion, though it may sound contradictory, is not bringing anyone else into this machine of flesh and anguish. Because yes, there may be beautiful moments, I don't deny it. The smell of the sea, a silent hug, a song that gives you goosebumps. But each of those moments is chained to the fear of losing it. And they all, without exception, end. Beauty in this world is fleeting, Suffering, on the other hand, is constant. And yet, we continue calling this life. We keep selling it as a treasure, when in reality, for many, it's a debt, a burden, a cross they carry without having chosen it. What if, for once, we stopped looking the other way? What if we had the courage to say out loud what so many feel in silence? Because there is something that is scarier than dying, and that is realizing that your entire life you've been repeating a lie, that the gift of existence was never a gift, that you were thrown into a game without rules, without meaning, and without an exit. And there you are, with your rehearsed smile, with your full agenda, with your anxiety disguised as productivity, trying to find meaning in something that perhaps never had any. What if the real wisdom isn't in accepting life, but in questioning it mercilessly? Perfect. Let's keep digging. Let's talk about desire, not as self-help books or advertising portray it. Let's talk about desire as a curse, as the root of suffering that never extinguishes. Because here's a brutal paradox. The more you desire, the emptier you are. Desire is a promise that never fully fulfills. There's always something missing. There's always a better version. There's always another step. And when you get there, what's at the top isn't peace. It's more desire. From the moment you're conscious, you start desiring. You desire affection, recognition, pleasure, belonging. And that seems natural, even necessary. But the problem is that every desire fulfilled gives rise to another. It never ends. It's a wheel that doesn't stop. Have you noticed that even your greatest achievements feel insufficient after a few days? That what you longed for so much loses its shine as soon as you attain it. Exactly. Desire doesn't seek to complete you, it keeps you busy, and that's why life becomes a perpetual chase. Chasing is the only thing you know how to do. You don't know how to just be. You don't know how to inhabit the present without wanting to change it. You're always negotiating with the future. When I have this, I'll be happy. When I get past this, I'll be fine. And when does that moment arrive? Never. Because desire is an elegant saboteur. It makes you believe that there's something else, something better, something that will make you feel complete. But there's no completeness in a system that teaches you to desire as a way of life. This is where philosophy becomes a dirty mirror, because as much as you want answers, often it only gives you more questions. And the question no one wants to face is, who would you be without your desires? If you removed the longing to be more, to have more, to impress, to transcend, what would remain? Would it be you, or just an empty space? It's uncomfortable, I know. But it's also liberating. Because behind that emptiness is a possibility. The possibility of stopping the chase, of stopping trying to compensate for the fact that you never asked to be here. Desire is not a motor, it's a chain, one that seems to move you forward, but actually drags you in circles. And when you realize that, you begin to see with different eyes. You realize that the entire system is designed so you never stop. If you don't desire a perfect body, you desire a brilliant career. If you don't desire power, you desire validation. And if you manage to disconnect from all of that, the system calls you crazy, labels you a failure, because there's no room for stillness in a world that thrives on your dissatisfaction. And do you know what's even more perverse? That this desire machine starts spinning long before you can understand it. From childhood, they instill in you what you should want, what you should dream of, what you should avoid. And so you grow up with a script in your head that you never wrote. A script that dictates your goals, your emotions, your fears. Did you ever ask yourself if what you want is really what you want? Or if it's just an echo of what someone else decided for you? Identity becomes a collage of others' expectations, You're defined by your achievements, your titles, your relationships. But if you take all that away, who remains? Do you know why we're so afraid to be alone, without distractions, without goals? Because without the external noise, the abyss remains, the emptiness of not knowing why we're here. And that silence is unbearable for many. That's why people prefer anything over facing that question. They prefer exhausting routines, mediocre relationships, soulless goals. They prefer filling their life with noise, with tasks, with duties. Because if you stop, if you really stop, the emptiness appears. And that emptiness has one question burned into the bones. What for? What is all this for? Why work so hard to maintain a life you didn't choose? Why build a future if the price is living a present that hurts? Why perpetuate the species if the species itself doesn't know how to stop suffering? This is where everything connects. Because desire, suffering, and birth are all tied together with the same thread. Bringing a new life into the world is not just exposing it to pain, it's also condemning it to desire, to seek without finding, to live with a thirst that never gets quenched. And the cruelest part, to believe that thirst is normal, that's how it's supposed to be. But there's another option, not a magical solution, nor a formula for happiness. Number, but a different perspective. One that doesn't deny pain, that doesn't glorify desire, and dares to question whether it's worth continuing a game no one asked to start. Life is not a gift, it's an imposition, and when you understand that, everything changes. Not because you become cynical, not because you lose the will to live, quite the opposite. Because you stop chasing what doesn't exist, and you finally begin to look at the truth, unadorned. Now, I want to take you to an even darker corner, but one that's necessary, one that rarely gets touched because it's too uncomfortable, because it unveils something we prefer to ignore: the invisible link between suffering and memory. Have you noticed how pain lasts longer than anything else? You may have lived through hundreds of joyful moments, but just one moment of deep suffering is enough to contaminate it all. It's like an ink stain in a glass of water. One drop is enough to spoil it completely. Memory is not a neutral file. It doesn't store facts, it stores sensations. And guess what emotions stick most in the mind? The ones that hurt. It's no accident. It's an evolutionary mechanism. We remember pain because it helps us survive. But surviving is not the same as living. Surviving is reaction. Living is choice. And most of us aren't living. We're surviving with scars we don't fully understand. Now tell me, if existence is configured so that suffering leaves deeper scars than pleasure, doesn't it seem like we've lost from the very beginning? Pain repeats itself, is remembered, is reinterpreted again and again. Pleasure, on the other hand, dissolves. A good moment doesn't come back, a wound, yes. And not only does it return, it evolves. It becomes trauma, fear, avoidance. And when you finally reach a stage of apparent stability, the fear of losing it begins to corrode it from the inside. Anxiety is born not only from the pain you've experienced, but from the one you know is coming. Because you know it. We've talked about it. Happiness is fleeting. Pain is guaranteed. Then we come to the end, the place where all this leads. And it's here that I want to make something clear. Understanding this reality isn't a sentence, it's a liberation. Because when you stop romanticizing life, when you accept that pain is structural and not accidental, something changes. You free yourself from the burden of having to find meaning in everything. You free yourself from the guilt of not always being fine. You stop forcing yourself to be happy, and you start being conscious. Consciousness, even though it hurts, is power. The power to break the cycle. not to repeat what others did by inertia, not to bring more lives into the world just for them to repeat what you're feeling now. The power to stay still and not give in to the noise that tells you, do what everyone does. Number, you don't have to do it. You can stop. You can observe. You can question. And if you've made it this far, you're probably doing it. You're probably one of the few who don't settle for living asleep, who don't accept the script they gave you at birth. And that, in a world like this, is a radical act. So, thank you. Really. Now, I want to propose something. If this video stirred even a single idea in you, I want you to go down to the comments and write this. Life wasn't offered to me. It was imposed on me. That sentence isn't just a summary, it's a declaration, a break, a mirror many don't dare to look at. And if you'd like to continue exploring these types of topics, if you want to keep unraveling the uncomfortable truths that others prefer to avoid, subscribe. Here, you won't find easy answers, but you will find the right questions. And sometimes, that's all we need. Now, I'll go, but not like anyone else leaves. I'll leave like the idea you can't undo. Like that voice that keeps resonating in your head while you turn off your phone. Like that thought that won't let you sleep tonight. I'll leave, but I'll stay in the corner of your mind where you keep what you fear to admit most. See you in the next abyss.